good people, and welcome back to another episode of Conversations with Beloved Kindred. My name is Dr. Grace Gipson, an assistant professor in the Department of African American Studies at Virginia Commonwealth University.
And I'm Dr. Kenneth Williams, and I'm a visiting assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh in the Department of Africana Studies.
All right, so we coming down the wire with another, we're closing out a series, and excited. It's been a good ride, Dr. Robinson. It's been good. I've enjoyed talking about Lovecraft Country and diving into the many layers of it. So I'm excited for today.
Me too. I'm happy to get to this conclusion because the ninth episode was one of my favorites. So I'm really excited to really get to this point and really bring the whole series together. So yeah, I'm closing this series out.
Indeed. And so we also want to make sure we recognize Asian American Pacific Islander month, and how, because there is that connection in Lovecraft Country. So definitely want to make sure we acknowledge and incorporate that and into today's discussion. And yeah, you got any other thoughts on anything going on?
I think it is important that we recognize this month because Asian American Pacific Islanders have been an important part of American history. And so as we talk about with Lovecraft Country and the history of Black people in the United States, it's important that we recognize that it was not just only Black people here or Black and white people here, that we acknowledge Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, and their work and experiences here as well, and their heritage, and how we have even been influenced by their culture as they're influenced by ours.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you all know we have been talking about these last two episodes kind of like in, little small tidbits because we couldn't give it away yet, obviously. But we finally get to really dive in and talk about, another two of our favorite episodes. And it's also, the closeout of the series. So there's a lot we're gonna hopefully tie up some loose ends for folks. We're gonna definitely think about questions afterwards to consider about the series. There's going to be the hope of will the series come back, for a season 2. So this first episode 9, is titled Rewind 1921.
Yeah.
And once again, the creators, the writers of Lovecraft Country, they know how to name these episodes. They are very on point with that, and they keep that together. So yes, we are literally rewinding back to 1921 in this episode. So, we're starting with this idea of the family are all together, trying to find some level of peace from the previous episode. So if you all recall about what happened with Dee and everything. And so now we're trying to, move from how do we get Dee to a better place? How do we all as a family get to a better place? How do we find some semblance of peace, like I said? And so, because Dee is still in this comatose state due to the spell and curse that's been put on her. So everybody's trying to figure out their role and why they didn't do what they should have been doing. Because
back at this episode called Rewind 1921. And I like even this title, calling it Rewind. It's like we're going back. We are, not just referencing the past. We're actually going back to it. We're being back in this place. And so you start seeing this conversation on time, which we will reference later. And we open it with this, Dee is, last scene, she was being chased by Bopsy and Topsy. And, she was being beaten, not pretty much, or the spell was on her. And so at the beginning of this scene, we see how, beginning of this series, this show, we see how she has been a victim of the spell, and the spell is still on her. And everyone, the family, Letty, you have Atticus, Montrose, everyone's trying to figure out, except Hippolyta, she's not back yet. Like, why did you not pay attention to her? And then Letty said, I told her to stay in the house. But again, they're arguing about why they didn't do anything, but the focus should still be on, why isn't it not on Dee even in this argument? Like, you can deal with that later. So at that moment, she's still being rendered invisible.
Right. I mean, everybody's talking about who wasn't there but it's like, so you weren't there, but she's not there. Like, you're still not bringing her at the center of the focus of this discussion, even in her comatose state, even in her, all of this, like not really physically the body being there, everybody blaming everybody for their neglect of D. Like nobody. So, yeah.
They're spending more time arguing than actually saying, okay, none of us was there. No one took accountability. That was the problem too. No one took really true accountability for what happened. And again, D is there. So, we go to this idea now that they're like, okay, we need to figure out what can we do for D? How do we deal with D? And you see this conversation and this relationship between Letty and Ruby. And even saying, Ruby, I need for you to reach out to help figure out what to do. Get Christina, even though everyone was like,
nobody wanted to do that. Nobody, and I don't blame them. I mean, there's nothing that Christina has done to invoke a level of trust. So everybody's kind of like, which puts a further strain on Ruby and Letty at the same time too. So yeah, there's, nobody wants to ask Christina. Like, that's the last resort that everybody is thinking about here.
Then they realize that it's that type of magic, that evil magic, that will help heal D or to deal with D. So they had to technically go to this, this racist woman to really get that, because it was racism that caused it. So even that led to them realizing, okay, just try Christina and see what could happen. Even though we know there would absolutely be consequences, but we need to help D. And so in this conversation, you have Christina saying, okay, we need the blood of the closest relative. And then
that's right. So we're like, so that closest relative would be Montrose. Because since you said, like you said, Hippolyta's not there, George is not there. So, now, Montrose is kind of like the spot is on him. It's like, you have to now step up, even though he steps up in many ways, uniquely small step ups, but like, this is a major.
He saved D. Technically,
he did. If it wasn't for him, like, she still would have been fighting off, So yeah. And in that, we see his alcoholism kind of come out even more. Like, we see it throughout the series, but it's very much, continues to be a hindrance. It continues to be a roadblock for him, and very much even into this episode.
And I appreciate that, because, when we think of, we don't really think that, but there's usually a stereotype of people who are alcoholics. And it's like, we have to understand they have a story and they're struggling as well. And so we should look at them as though they're problematic and criminals. We need to also seek to understand why they are drinking. And so it gave us insight into what it does it mean to have an addiction. And we see that here, because he started to drink when he realized that he may have to tell the secrets. So he went and he had the gasoline. He said it tasted like, said it tasted like gasoline or something.
Right.
And but that was his way of dealing with this secret. So you see how, again, this alcoholism is tied to his trauma, and it will come back up, but it really gave us insight into alcoholism, especially in the case of Montrose, how he had to keep himself a secret.
Yeah, I mean, he was what they call a functioning alcoholic. Like, he was able to still, go about his day. He was still able to do everything in life, even with this, alcoholism, on his back. That was the monkey on his back, one would say.
And at this moment that we are introduced in this episode to his drinking, he says to Atticus, he may be George's son. He is George's son. He said he may be. He didn't really actually say definite, but Tick finds out that he is George's son.
Talk about a drum being bopped, a bomb being dropped.
Yes, but it's funny. But it goes back to even that conversation of when he said, "Do you have any more secrets?" You remember last episode, and he was like, "Oh, I'm dyslexic." Like, "Oh, wow, I didn't know that." Blah blah blah. So Tick became very upset. He was like, "This whole time I was here wishing he was my dad," and so that was just like, "Wow, you're gonna drop that bomb now?" But he had to. 2 seconds later, Hippolyta showed up. If Hippolyta came maybe 10 minutes earlier, we wouldn't have had the secrets.
I don't know what we would have had, to be perfectly honest. Morris, can we pause?
Morris?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It took me a second. Hey.
No problem. I need to move rooms because.
Okay. Yeah. Let's take a pause. Go ahead, and what you can do is, if you want to set up shop, we'll keep it up, and then you just transition and just come back into it, and we'll just leave it up.
Okay. All right.
Okay,
Let me.
Oh, you're on a laptop.
3, 2.
All right, so we got Hippolyta coming back. So like I said, we talked about Montrose and the alcoholism and the impact that it has, and how there's reasoning why, why he had to do this. And also the fact that Tick is like processing the fact that you might not be my daddy, but I went through all these beatings and everything. But yeah, so, he's still grappling with that, on top of, okay, we still got to figure out what we're going to do with D. So.
Right. On top of that.
On top of that.
I could have had him as my father this whole time while you were beating me and abusing me.
Yeah.
I wish he was my father. Again, you guys, D.
She's still here. She's still here.
And she's still suffering. Can we go back to that?
Right.
Hippolyta shows up.
And it's just kind of like boom, here I am. And you're like, where you been?
Where you been?
And where you come from?
At least waited 30 more minutes, so it won't seem like you could just came a little bit earlier. But she's been gone. And she said, D's sick?
Yeah, it was just the way that she kind of entered back into the space, like, so this is how you make your entrance in? Like,
right.
D's sick? Like, where you been? Yeah, okay, yeah, she's sick.
To the store. Like, did you go to the store, come back and say D's sick? Man. Exactly. Come on, you had time to go through different words. And she later did say herself, like, one day is like 200 days or 200.
Right.
So it was like, where were you?
Yeah. So in that, what becomes fascinating is the fact that Hippolyta was able to go to all these many places, that she was able to see so much, in this, however amount of time it was. Because we could say it seemed like brief, but for her, it was a long time. It was days, hours, minutes, whatever. And she speaks of this idea of like infinite possibilities. And, this goes back to the I Am episode where she was able to name herself. She was able to, go here, do this, capture something, reclaim something. Right. And she was able to have, like, as she says, these infinite possibilities of going to different places at different times. And there was nothing stopping her about it. So in a way, we could see her returning back into this moment as a new woman, as a new person. There was this rebirth that took place with her return back to Chicago.
Right. And then, even in that moment, she I guess not necessarily at that moment, but she expressed how she using her wisdom to help her daughter. Like, she has all this wisdom now, so now she's back.
Right.
But my thing is, even though she became a new woman, it really, I guess, in my perspective, this idea of, okay, you have Hippolyta, then you have Hippolyta the wife, Hippolyta the mother. Right. And at that moment, she could not be the mother. She had to find out who she was, then return to become this mother. But at the same time, Dee was always a daughter looking for a mother.
Right.
Dee, but she was still looking for her mother. And so that was still this neglect of this Black girl who's like, I'm literally being chased around by racism. I have a police officer putting a spell on me. I am in a comatose state. Where are you? And we'll reference that later. But it was still this neglect at this time, even as she was trying to find herself.
Right. She was trying to balance who she was and find herself. And in that finding herself, she, has to find motherhood again. She has to, figure out, like, I'm here, but I need to be here for D. So it's a balancing act that, Black women often play anyway. This is something that we go through every day. Like, we are constantly balancing being a woman, being a daughter, being a mother, being, you know, a teacher, being support, all of these things. And we're expected to do them all at once. So it's not like, oh, today you get to be a mother. You don't have to worry about being a daughter today. Or, you know,
Right.
it's you got to do that all the time simultaneously. And so considering, you know, I have to say she wore the superhero cape well, considering, you know, even though, yes, we can still say that she did participate much like the rest of the family in that neglect, but you know, it was, you saw the efforts that she was making. So it wasn't definitely out of malicious intent. It definitely was not like, oh, I'm purposely doing
Right.
this.
Right.
So,
But also, it is important that we acknowledge that Black women are more than just people in relation to others.
right. Mm-hmm.
We're also autonomous in our being. And so Hippolyta had to figure out who she was, in order
Mm-hmm.
to be an effective mother,
Yep.
to be an effective wife, to be an effective teacher, to be an effective motherboard, as we will talk about, to be an effective anything. She had to figure out who she was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, like you said, it wasn't out of any ill intent. It was just so that she can figure out, who am I? Because I want my child to be who she is.
Exactly.
So I
Exactly.
can teach her to be free in that way.
Yep. And in these infinite possibilities and this infinite wisdom that she's using to save, you know, her daughter, as you mentioned, she becomes this motherboard. So, you know, you know, Conversation with Beloved and Kindred is about the speculative. It's about sci-fi. It's about, and, you know, and how it's housed in Black women's bodies, if you think about it in that way. And this motherboard, her actually serving as a way to open the portal
Yes.
for Tick, Letty, and Montrose to rewind back to 1921. We're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. You know, but like, so this idea that, if you all remember from the I Am episode, she had those kind of purple blocks or so on her arms from where she was plugged in. And so it wasn't like that was a one-time deal. Like, this is like, I can use these again. I can recharge and help someone else into the future, into the past. And so as this motherboard, she houses a lot of information. If we think about what a motherboard is and
Right.
what its function is, like, that's powerful. That's really electric, literally and figuratively. So
It really was. And I'm at that one moment when she became the motherboard and she was fixing it up with Tick.
mm-hmm.
And I remember her saying, like, because Tick was like, what do I do with these, you know, with all these cords or whatever.
Right.
I love how she took authority.
Yeah.
She's like, I got this, you learn from me. Don't go off your assumptions. I don't even know what you do. But then she was like, braid the wires like I taught you how to braid these hair.
Yes.
I was like, come through. Yeah.
It was powerful.
Using gender roles and conversations on hair at the same time. You know, this man learning how to braid. He took a minute to pause, like,
what do you mean? Like, huh? And then he got it. He got it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But that to me was very powerful.
Yeah. I mean, the ways in which we, like you said, blend hair, technology, science, you know, all of that. And like you said, I loved how you said how she had it. She did this with authority. Like, there was no questioning. There was no second guessing. Like, she knew what she was doing. And
She really did.
so
No one to say anything to her. That's one thing I like about Hippolyta. It's kind of like what I like about Scorpion from Mortal Kombat. He's speaking.
yes.
It's like, I'm doing this. It's done.
Mm-hmm.
You get to it. And even when they were delaying, trying to figure out what to do when the portal opened, she was like, go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You're playing games.
Like, I only got so much time here. Like,
I'm not giving you a hug. Just go. Oh, that was powerful. And then, you know, but then the sacrifices that comes with having so much power. It can still be a lot, because this whole time her hair actually turns blue.
Like Orinthia blue. Yeah.
And that's who her daughter imagined her to be, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So to me, that was beautiful. But, you know, the burdens that come with having so much power and magic cannot be discounted. That's why now, you know, we emphasize self-care. Because
absolutely,
as Black women, you know, and that's her being the motherboard, the center of this computer. It's a lot that's on the motherboard. If a motherboard goes out, the computer's done.
Everything's done.
So
you need it.
It bears the burden, and that's what she did. But we have to acknowledge that it did have some effect on her body.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yes, so we're gonna come back to that in the episode 10. We'll come back to the blue here. We'll come back to Orinthia Blue. You know, we will always come back to, you know, the burden and the joy and the purpose and the function of Black women's bodies like that. You know, as you all know, we talk about it all the time. So it doesn't go away. That subject is not a one shot type of deal.
Absolutely not.
But a slight detour, you know, I brought up this theme in our kind of green room type area on Hustling 101. Now, I know y'all probably like hustling. Like, what are you talking about? So you see where Christina, like, she's all about how can I get the ultimate power here?
Mhm.
How can I? Who do I have to use? Who do I have to sacrifice? Who do I have to make sure to get out of my way so
Right,
that I can get
right.
to what I need?
Mhm.
And if someone has to suffer, if someone has to be tricked, you know, it's, you know, she gonna do whatever she has to do. And
True.
you see Ruby kind of beginning to really like that game, recognize game here, you know, and she's understanding, or if not understanding, she's a lot more clear on what Christine is about.
Mhm.
So
That's that is definitely true. But the thing is, it's like I'm happy that now you know Ruby. But
right.
with that, what do you do?
What do you do with that? Because it's one thing to know and to recognize it and acknowledge it, but then what are you going to do with that? It's the same with, you know, I love to go back to that moment that Lena Horne, no, excuse me, not Lena Horne, was it, who was it? Josephine Baker, excuse me, in the I Am episode tells Hippolyta, you know, what you going to do with that anger?
Right.
What you going to do with it? You know, you can be angry all you want, but what you going to do with it?
Oh my gosh, that brings up a point we got to reference later. What do you do
Okay.
with that rage?
Woo. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll come back to that. Put a pin in that, y'all. What do you do with all the rage? Yes. So yeah, you know, there's a moment of hustling 101 that we see in this particular episode, and seizing opportunities and at what cost. And you know, and some people become casualties, and we'll see in episode 10 that some people really do actually become a casualty. Probably didn't think they would, but they would eventually be that. So
Because Christina even used this opportunity to say, Tick, I'm coming for you.
yeah.
Well, you know, hey D, congratulations, you know. But and I helped her, and she even went to the officer who put the spell on D
Right.
and was like, you know, I want to see you. She needed to get rid of him for her
Exactly.
own purpose, just
Right.
FYI. But she went back to him, and the line was very interesting. How she was like, "I hope to see you die 1,000 deaths, but I only get to see you die once."
Right. Right.
And that was interesting because again, it wasn't because of what he was doing to Dee or to other Black people in the area. It was about, I need you to die so that I could, you know, reach the status I need to. I need your power.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then, you know, she comes back again with D, and she's like, okay, fine, I'll help D, but Tick,
I need this from you.
I need this.
So it's, you know, it's never because I want to help you.
No.
It's never because I want to, you know, make a change. It's never. It's always about what do I get out of this? And, you know, this will also come up later in episode 10. You know, if we think about Christina as this white woman in the 1950s, and the fact that she was able to do so much that normally was not happening for people of her stature. Like that was not happening. So yeah.
I want to add to that though, because yes, she was able to do a lot as this white woman,
Mm-hmm.
but she was able to do a lot by the death, not necessarily killing them, but the deaths of the men around her.
And serving as a white man as well, too.
Serving as a white man.
Mm-hmm.
So she could not be Christina if her father was there.
Right.
She could not really be Christina if William was there.
Mm-hmm.
So she, even to get to this point, she had to pretend to be William.
Right.
And also with the obliteration of the white men in her life.
Exactly.
So yeah.
So there was that commercial break on Hustle 101. And back to our special, Tulsa. Woo! We've been dying to talk about Tulsa, y'all. We've been dying to talk about it.
It is so powerful. Like I can't even express how powerful this episode was. I can't. It's great. It was well done.
Well done.
And, you know, you talked about before, Dr. Gipson. It wasn't inevitable. We had to go back to Tulsa.
Yep.
You know, even when you think about Montrose and all the issues Montrose dealt with,
mm-hmm.
he we had to go back to Tulsa to even understand how this family ended up being this family.
Exactly.
We
It
had
had to put the pieces together. Everything had to glue back to each other. Yeah.
So yeah, it was definitely interesting. And then you see how time travel in this case work and how we see sci-fi.
Yep.
How we see it's like the game, you know, the time traveling, where you know you go back into another portal and you see you can't make any changes. You can only view. You can only, you know, see what's going on. Where they have to get the book, the Book of Adam at this point.
Book of names. Book of names.
Names. But
Yeah.
you even see this Black imaginary, the speculative fiction coming through when how they're interacting with the past. And we're going to talk about time because time is a big part of this entire series, technically.
Yeah.
Definitely this particular rewind episode. But it's just very interesting because you see how the past comes, you know, against each other. Well, comes against the present. So really questions like, is the past really the past?
Right.
You always say at the end of the series, the past is always present.
Right. It is.
Times look different. So you have the person going, rewinding. So you see from the perspective of the lived experience, and you also see from the perspective of someone visiting the past. So I find that very interesting, and we get to see multiple ways of engaging the past in this way. You know,
absolutely. And I've mentioned this and some other things that I've had with other colleagues and so forth. You know, shout out to Octavia Butler. This kind of this moment in this episode reminds me of Kindred, when, you know, Dana goes back and she has to go back to change, you know, something in order for the present to be what it is. And so, you know, Toni Morrison, Octavia Butler, they have these creative minds and have been able to tell these stories in such unique ways. And we see that also personified here through Lovecraft Country. And I was excited to know that they were dealing with Tulsa. Because interesting enough, it's like all of a sudden Tulsa has become the it conversation now. If you notice, like everybody want to talk about Tulsa now. And it was like, so now it's cool to talk about Tulsa, like this massacre, because if we do recall, the Library of Congress has changed it officially to be a massacre and not a riot. So
I just want to add to that in the show, Montrose said in the previous episode, you know, he said the Tulsa riot, where actually was a massacre.
Right.
Even before the Library of Congress got to it, Montrose said that in the show. He said no, it was a massacre. And actually, when, you know, Black scholars tend to talk about Tulsa, we say Tulsa riots, but we know it's a massacre,
right?
Because it was a massacre. So it was a good moment when the Library of Congress actually said no, it was a massacre.
Yeah,
so that's exactly what happened. So yeah,
so we're getting to see, you know, a retelling of the story of Tulsa. You know, for those that also have seen Watchmen, you know, you also are familiar with the way they talk about Tulsa there. And from this vantage point, what makes this unique is that Black folks are, you know, we're in the writing room and they're telling the story. Because in previous times, there have been many people who have been trying to tell the story of Tulsa. That just have not gotten the chance. Either people just are not listening, and they don't want it to be heard, or they're trying to change it to fit a particular narrative. So to be able to see, you know, Black writers actually engaging with the story of Tulsa, and we get to see, you know, a fictional aspect added to it to kind of make the pill a little bit easier to swallow. I mean, it would never be, you know, easy to swallow, but, you know, for us to be able to see it through the lens of George, Montrose, and Dora, you know, their backstory, it gives an opportunity for additional audiences to engage with Tulsa so that they can learn about it. Because I know many of my students, after watching that episode, were like, yeah, I went up and looked it up because I didn't know anything about this.
Right. Thank you.
Which is sad and unfortunate that it's not being talked about. Like, why? You know, so, but people even in Tulsa were even saying, you know, that it was not something that people were regularly talking about. So even in the city itself, it was kind of being buried. So, but buried no more. It's out there.
Right, exactly. And I want to even add to that, like, I'm glad we're talking about it. And even in how the episode, again, you have the lived experience versus the visiting the past, or engaging the past from the visiting experience. And it really speaks to how we have living relatives today who may not have been in the Tulsa, but in other events of events of racism or
Yeah.
activities and racial injustice.
Racial
And
terrorism, yeah.
there we go. And you have elders who are not willing to talk about it because of the trauma they're experiencing.
Right.
So watching this episode, you see how Montrose, he's scared to go to the past, and that's when his mind was like, "Go," because he was like, he saw the room and he was nervous because he doesn't want to revisit the past. So even when you have conversations with elders, which are still very, very valuable, and we need to do that, we have to understand the trauma they experienced, even going back in time and talk about some of these events. Because
Absolutely.
we read about it and we listen to the testimonies, but we never lived it like some elders lived it. And so you see these two different, the interplay between the two conversations or the two ways of engaging the past. And you see how Letty and Tick are like, come on, we gotta go do this. And he's like, I'm stuck. Like, this is still like, I know you want to do this, but y'all don't understand.
You can hear the fear in him.
He was like, he kept stopping. He was just like, and then even when, they would get upset with him, he's like, you don't understand. Because he was seeing his past. He was reliving it. So it was
this is not a past that he wanted to necessarily have to relive or see again. Like they say, there's the moments where you're like, I just want to forget about it. That's like how Montrose was. It was like he just wants to forget about that. I don't want to have to bring that back up to my memory. And I, I can only imagine how it was on the set. Like I'm sure they had to have counselors or something on standby, because to have to re-witness that, even though they weren't there, but like you have to embody that for the role.
Yeah.
And like I'm sure that takes a huge toll on you mentally and physically about that. We're not talking about something play. Like we're talking about people being burned and shot and killed, just like it was nothing, and having to bring that back to the fold.
I'm not gonna go jump ahead, but Letty, I feel bad for Letty too. You go back in the past. Now we haven't went back in the past, but to go back and know what is going to happen and have to engage with those people, knowing what's going to happen to them.
Yeah.
What type of stress was that on her?
How do you operate knowing that?
We didn't really, but I think it should have been explored. Like, what type of trauma did that cause for Letty? But we'll talk about that in 2 seconds, because we got to talk about trauma in more detail. Now we have about the fire.
And we talk about fire from all kind of angles. Fire from the massacre, fire from a house being bombed, fire from death. All of that.
That
is this,
because what fire in itself. It was so many different points. We're going to talk about the symbolism of fire. So one of the main scenes was that of them being in a house and it was burning.
Right.
That was one of the main scenes. And you see Letty and what was her name? Nana Hattie. And they were in there because Letty wanted to get the book of names.
Right.
They need the book of names to save Dee. And so she went up to the room to look for the book of names. Nana Hattie came up and was like, what are you doing? And there was
like, who are you?
Why are you here? And get out my life. And so once everything was explained, Nana Hattie was like, I have to go save everybody. And then she looked back and she said, we're not gonna make it through this, are we? And then and Letty was just, if I was Letty, I wouldn't be able to take it. But she was like, no, you're not. And so after a little bit more conversation, they exchanged the book of names. And they had to give it to Letty, and then she wanted her as the house was burning.
Right, literally burning.
Yes. At first she said you need to run, and Letty was like, I have immunity. I won't die by the fire. So they held hands and they prayed. They said the Lord's Prayer. And as Nana Hattie was burning, you could see her skin and her hands, everything just turned to ash. And Letty's just continuing the prayer.
Yep.
And that says a lot too, and we're going to talk about in 3 seconds about the whole conversation of fire and catching the fire, as in Sonia Sanchez's poem. You see here, yes, she's burned, but Letty caught the fire.
Yes.
The book of names, she caught that fire, and she was able to move through this fire because even in the midst of all that was going on, when she walked out the house and she was walking down the road, fire was just coming everywhere. And
It's
she's
like
like,
just
I'm not daunted or I'm not affected by this fire. I caught it, I controlled this fire, and I'm walking to save thee. And so in this conversation, and we see the burning, we hear Sonia Sanchez's poem. What's it called?
Catch the Fire.
Catch the Fire. I'm going to bring that poem back up later in episode 10 as well. But that poem was so important because it's like, what do you do with this fire?
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with it? I say, where is your fire? Can't you smell it coming out of your past? Oof. She talks more about it, and it's a great poem. You should read it by Sonia Sanchez. The fire of sit-ins and marches that made us jump boundaries and barriers. The fire that took street talk sounds and made righteous Imhotep raps. Where's your fire? The torch of life, full of Nzinga and Nat Turner and Garvey, and Du Bois and Fannie Lou Hamer and Martin and Malcolm and Mandela. The whole thing of, we see all this stuff from our past, right? Mm-hmm. And it's upsetting, it's problematic, but catch the fire, keep moving with it,
right?
Keep, going forth, keep fighting for injustices. Mm-hmm. And then later on in the poem, she says, catch the fire, don't kill it, don't kill, hold the fire, don't kill, learn the fire, don't kill. Take that rage. It's not about being angry, it's about learning.
Right.
It's like Letty did with Nana Hattie. As Nana Hattie was burning, she was like, you are my faith turned into flesh. So you go forth. I may burn, but you have my fire in you.
Yes.
The generations will continue without you. Mm-hmm. You have caught the fire. And so it was a very powerful scene. We see, again, it's about the fact that she did not let this fire consume her.
At all.
That she is the next generation. Her child is the next generation. Nana Hattie knew that.
Right. It was like she was willing, she was ready to die. She knew it was going to happen. There wasn't going to be any change in that. You could be coming back in time, but it wasn't going to change. That was going to happen. So let me provide you with the tools. Mm-hmm. Let me give you what you need so that when you go back, you can be better prepared. Because this is going to happen. Like, we're not changing that. I'm not going to be able to go back with you, but let me at least give you the tools to take back the resources that you're going to need, because you're going to need them,
Exactly. And it's like, when you think of our generations, like our ancestors.
Yeah.
They gave us the tools to survive. They gave us our fire. We're like, go.
Yep. It's for us to catch it. It's for us to catch
it. So that was a very powerful moment, because here we see this interplay between, what is it, generational sacrifice and generational relations.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Conversation where, again, just like we just discussed, you have the previous generation who are here to prepare us and to give us, to pass on, because you're not supposed to keep the fire for yourself.
Right.
It's supposed to be passed on.
Mm-hmm.
So you see this, and she sacrificed herself for this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But either way, she knew it was inevitable. But she was like, I will burn, because at least I know you have the fire.
Right. And we saw also, because fire is this constant metaphor throughout the series, we even see the symbolism of fire. It's kind of ironic in the sense that that's how Dora's family was taken out, was by fire. Yeah. They were burned alive. And so to see, knowing that, and then knowing and seeing Letty walking through the fire, and it wasn't burning her, holding hands with Nana Hattie as they're saying the Lord's Prayer. And, she's still standing, and she's invulnerable to it. So, I mean, fire is it's deep. It's powerful. It hurts, but it heals, everything about it. So, and as you said, fire will come back again, in the final episode too. Like, it doesn't go anywhere. It's the thing that, like you said, we have to catch it, carry it, pass it. Don't let it get extinguished. What you gonna do with that fire, basically.
What you gonna do with that fire? Because again, we see how in their dreams, Letty and Tick's dreams, it was their ancestor running out of a burning house throughout the whole series. And we're at this point, we're scared. Like, we're scared of this fire. Like, oh, get out, because you're gonna die. And in this episode, we see, like, no, the fire is not meant for us to die in it.
Right.
It's more to this fire. You
And
know,
we understand why the fire is there. Because like you said, with the first time we see his great great grandmother, running through this firing building, all we can think of is like, oh my God, she's trapped in this building. She's got to get out. She's got to escape. Not realizing she's the one that set that fire. She's the one that made this, lit the match,
yeah,
as we say.
yeah,
So our fear becomes an understanding. Our fear becomes like, oh, okay, I get it. Okay.
right, right, exactly.
So we're still continuing, the trauma doesn't go anywhere. So even in that, we're still reliving the trauma. It's for Montrose, he's
Yeah.
also triggered, by this.
All his senses are being activated. He
Ooh,
smells. He's like, smell. I smell. He's the smells of the fire, the death
the
triggers him.
burning flesh. Hmm.
Yes. And you even see how this trauma. We see exactly what trauma caused the issues with his relationship with Tick.
Yep.
Because he runs away, and they thought that he was going to go save George.
Right.
He actually was like, no, I'm saving this guy because I loved him, and I couldn't, and I was
I
going to.
couldn't say it. Yeah.
I
Hmm.
couldn't say. I was going to tell him that I couldn't be with him anymore, and that I don't like him, and that I'm not gay.
Right.
And either next thing you know, they were I forgot his name, but both of them were accosted by racists.
Thomas was his name.
Thomas. And while we see this scene, while this scene is going on, Montrose is talking to Atticus, like,
Hmm.
I loved him, I want to save him, blah, blah, blah. And then they had this wonderful conversation where if you change this, that means that I may not exist.
Right.
He was like, no, you'll be all right. Look, all the sacrifices I made to have you,
Hmm.
this is just one of many.
Yep.
You're my son.
Hmm.
And then Atticus was like, okay, are you sure that I will be here?
Right.
Then for him to even say, like, you know what, you're right. He didn't say, you know what, you're right. But it was like, because even then you see the power of a father.
Right. Right.
He said, you can tell he did not want to even take the chance to not have Tick.
Nope.
He'd rather watch this again to
Hmm.
make sure that he has Tick. And that to me was very, very powerful.
Yep.
And
And we see also, them having the conversation about what it meant to be a man.
yeah,
Once again, the layers of Black masculinity, the relationship of fatherhood, of a father. And Montrose, would say, he no longer wanted to hide, himself to be a man. Because
yes,
that's what he had to do. He had, he still had that shame that he carried about his queerness, and how he was saying he had to cut out all of the soft parts of myself.
yes,
Whew. Like when you have to feel like you have to change yourself,
yeah,
like restructure yourself, rebuild yourself to
Mhm.
be a man, or to be what is considered a man,
Yes.
you know.
Open to ideas of what gender is. And
Hmm.
that in itself was like, oh, so that's why you became so hard and even rough with Atticus, because
Right.
you thought this was what it meant to be a man. So every time Atticus showed any emotion, you beat it out of him.
Hmm.
Because this is from what you had to deal with. And we even saw this episode how his father was beating him.
Right.
And it was like, okay, so now we actually visualize,
Understand.
we understand, like, okay, so this is being passed down.
Yep. The
And
fact that
after,
he tells George, at least there's one man in the house, or at least
yeah,
there's some
yeah,
man in the house. Like, how do you say that about your child?
like your son, like
Yeah.
how do you do that? And it was very traumatic. And again, I'm glad Tick was able to see that, because it was like, Tick, before, I know your father was not perfect. Now look, he was wrong for how he treated you. Don't get
Right.
me wrong. This is not to justify what he did, because it
Mhm.
does. But now you understand why.
You get it. You see, it connects, and you see how Montrose would protect and preserve his family at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing his manhood, his self,
Mhm.
for his son. Hmm.
And even seeing the death again of Thomas,
Right.
being
Like you
willing
you would
to
go through that again, just so you can make sure that your son is gonna be here, still existing.
right.
Ooh, so
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 good.
with knowing this, you know, keeping in the theme with the rewind, I got a question to ask you, or a couple questions to ask you. So, if you
Mhm.
could go back in time, where would you go? What would you do? Would you change anything? Would you keep anything the same?
I don't know.
I know, right? It's a tough question.
And it is a very tough question because I don't know. One of the things that always happens is you hear younger people say, if I was in the past, I would have beat him up. I would have shot him. I would have did all this stuff. You wouldn't have done any of that. You
You don't
didn't.
know what you would have done.
You may have been in the house. Like, we don't know what you could have done. So I honestly don't know, because I feel as though everyone up until this point and even further have did what they had to do according to what they had, with the
Right.
tools they had at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So if I went back with the tools I have now, I wouldn't even know how those tools would even work.
Right. Right.
Like, we now, like social media, we can tell the world about everything that's going on right here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If I go back to the 1950s with social media, everybody's gonna be like, "What is
What
that?
is that? Yeah.
Do you have the money to afford these computers? These stuff? Do you even are they invented? Like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so the tools we have now works for us here. I don't know what I would do, and if I could go back and change, I don't know.
And then it's almost the thing of, would I go back and
Right.
change it?
I would not,
Because
but I wouldn't. But would you?
it's something that that's the question that really is that I think about. It's not necessarily if I could go back, but would I?
Yeah.
Because some things, you really learn some things are
Right.
meant to be the way they are,
Right.
regardless of how brutal and traumatic they are. There's a purpose, for these situations to happen.
Mhm.
And so it's like, they're lessons too. So, like you said, when people say, if I was there, this is what I would have done. I don't know what I would have done. And I say, God knew what he was doing when
That's
he
it.
had me come when he did. He
I
knew
was
what he was doing. He
not make that. So if
right.
he's perfect, then I'm good with it. And the thing is, yes, and I agree with that. I don't want to go back and change anything because God meant for things to be the way they were. I'm
Mhm.
not, I'm not justifying the brutality,
Right.
but God, everything was planned
Mhm.
and it's out of our control.
Exactly.
And I can't just holistically say I'll go back and I'll end slavery.
Right. Right. I mean, because we don't know how that will impact us later on. Like, will that have affected us getting our PhD? Would
Right.
that have affected us going to college, period? So these are things that, there's a reason why some stuff happened the way it did. And I
Right.
don't want to change that. Like, if that were to affect what I have now, I don't want to change that.
Right. I mean,
So
'cause it's like, will we have this fire if we changed all that?
exactly.
And also, what could we have done? Let's say we ended it for African people of African descent.
Right.
What other population would it have turned towards?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, I would not. Again, I feel as though that is something that I could not answer.
Yeah, these are the what ifs that are meant to be what ifs. They were not meant to be answered. They were not meant to be changed. So, these are questions that are very rhetorical in a way. Like, they're not meant to be answered because we really don't have the answers to those questions.
Right. And I
So,
think people in my past did a great job. So I mean, congrats. Like, they did what they could. I mean, y'all, look, we here because of them.
thank you, thank you.
Did a
Exactly,
fantastic job. So I'm like,
hmm
y'all appreciate it. I can't even argue with that. Like, so no,
exactly.
I'm gonna go back. They good. They good.
Yep. So this was something that you had brought up as we were doing like another watching about the idea of like imagery as resistance. And you know me with my work, imagery is always going to be, I'm always talking about resistance and imagery. I'm always talking about how to change, how do we impact representation? How do we make it real?
Mhm.
But in this particular series, you brought up some good stuff in this idea of resistance and imagery.
Yes, because you see how, at this point we see what's Tick go back. Sorry, I had to switch gears again. But Tick go back and, well, not go back. He's in back. I guess he's around. Anyway,
Yeah.
so you see Tick, he's the one that everyone has been talking about, that Montrose always talk about, how there was this guy with a bat who saved them.
Yeah. Swinging like Jackie Robinson.
And that to me is very powerful because it's really acknowledging our own strengths, even in this. The
Mm-hmm,
image of
mm-hmm.
that resistance. And another aspect of resistance that I really thought was very interesting in this show was how we see, when we think of Tulsa, we think of Tulsa Massacre.
Right.
We also have to think of how Black people still resisted even in this moment. You see Black people shooting back. You see, the men in the household, the men leave and say, we're going to go protect. Like, we're still fighting back. Even in the midst of this massacre, we're still fighting back. Right. And I think that's important to speak of this as resistance. We need to talk about it in a different way. We have never been passive people.
At all.
We have always fought. It may not always come out where we're the victor, but we have always fought. And this imagery of how you see Black people just behind cars shooting, saying, oh, we got this.
Yeah.
You have the main character who comes back to save these people, or someone from his own family in the future. That was beautiful. And then to say that got your kid, and it ended up, I think earlier in the series we see it was 42, Jackie Robinson.
Yep, in that first episode.
Even that's powerful.
Exactly.
To see ourselves as,
heroes.
Heroes. We are our own heroes.
Yep. So this you made me channel back into something. I know as soon as I said it, it's gonna click for you. Like this idea of Black people weren't just like taking the fire. They weren't just taking what was happening to them. Particularly if we look at, the Freeman family and Dora's family. Yeah. I immediately thought of Dr. Akinyele Moses book, We Will Shoot Back. And the idea of armed resistance.
It's really great.
There we go. Yes. And how, like you said, Black folks was never just sitting there taking it.
Right.
We weren't just gonna be like, okay, y'all just gonna take us out. I throw the white towel in, hands up. No.
Seriously, even look at the cover of the book. He's not just laying in the grass. He is not laying in the grass.
He's laying in the grass, ready.
Okay, y'all coming? We're here.
I got you.
And so that resistance, to see these images of resistance is empowering. That's the way in which we cast this fire too. It's like we always fought. So even revisiting that question you had, like, would you go back to the past? Would you change anything? I've probably been a part of the fight, but they were fighting already.
Right. Let's not forget that. Because that fails to get mentioned into the story, is that they actually were fighting back.
They were fighting back. And so I'm really, happy that we see that. We see how, again, going back to Atticus swinging the bat. Atticus got it.
Yep.
Much else, but we'll talk about that another time. But then you have, these other Black people, the women. We got the house. We can shoot. So
like, you be the lookout. You let me know what's happening. Tell me where he is.
It's gonna be loud, so make sure you yell. Like, they got this.
Right.
Yeah. I think imagery as resistance is a key thing, because we even see it, like in one of your presentations when we talked about imagery and TV shows and pictures. And we have to talk about, Black people in these situations, not just as simply passive victims.
Right.
Because we take away our agency in these conversations. And you have the younger generation thinking they'll come back and be like, oh, I would have fought. Like, we haven't already done that.
Exactly.
So we do need to speak of the past as Black people, as active resistors. Like,
active resistors. Yeah.
We're doing this. It's like, we may not end up victorious at every fight, but we won the war.
Right. We was gonna fight like we were. We were gonna fight like it. So
even this show, I mean, I'm not gonna spend too much time on it, but I loved it because they were still shooting. Like, you may have guns, but we still shooting. I'm not gonna lay here either. Like,
exactly.
So yeah.
So the moment that I know for you for sure, the moment for me that I think was the pinnacle was the moment that, watching it again, my eyes got watery.
Yeah.
As they say, I wasn't crying. It was just a little, I just had it was a little watery. Montrose's monologue, which I feel like is what got him the SAG award that he got, that Emmy that he got this year. Like, that monologue was what secured it.
I don't even know how to explain how powerful that was. He was yelling. He just sat there and told the story. And I want the stories. One thing I want to add, even to resistance, and that the fact that we're telling our stories, that is resistance. That is active resistance. And so he sat there and he talked about the deaths of Black men and Black women, and he talked about how there were white people who hid the Black people in the basement and blah blah blah, and how it was very interesting, and it was very powerful, because even as he was telling the story, he was looking out and he see Letty
Yeah.
walking in the fire. So we see fire still because he's looking out a window and there's a reflection of fire. And so he's telling the story and Letty's walking, all this fire, and it was just one of the most powerful scenes.
I mean, he was recalling memories. He was like, over there was, such and such's house. Over there was such and such's business. They used to do this. And it was like he was just giving voice to these people.
Right.
And you could visualize it in your mind as he mentioned each person. You saw it. You saw that person. They came into your purview. You realize these events, all the stuff that happened. It's in a way he was testifying. He was giving these testimonies of these people who lived through each of these experiences, and the fact that he was able to tell that story. I think that's significant to note, is that it wasn't Letty telling it, it wasn't Tick telling it, it wasn't Hippolyta. It was Montrose, the one who was always shamed, the one who was always in the background, in the margins, the one who was always looked upon differently. He was the one able to tell the stories of the voiceless, of the ones who got pushed to the side. He got to tell, to make sure that they didn't anymore.
Exactly. It's like the least of them. I forgot the Bible scripture, but it's like the fact of he, is alcoholic. This one who, hid himself. He's queer. He's considered like the random person. He abused Tick.
The outsider, yeah.
Outsider. And he comes back and he tells all the stories. And again, when you think about the art of storytelling and even the role of memory, it's important to remember why it's important to cherish these memories. That's how we keep our stories alive, and that is resistance. That is activism.
It is.
Because even though systems seek to oppress us, not only in our, physically, but also in our history, to keep people understanding who we are. For him to sit there or stand there and tell these stories, that was resistance. That is activism.
And he remembered everything. There wasn't a detail he didn't miss. And that I'm just like, wow, that guy, he could recall everything.
Yeah. And he just sat there. It was just, and at that moment, we saw the trauma.
Yep.
But he didn't let that cloud the storytelling. He said, this needs to be said. And I loved how, technically there was no one else in the room, but he was like, I need to put this in the atmosphere that I remember these people.
Somebody got to hear this.
Yes, that I acknowledge it. So yeah, that was to me the most, I agree with that. That and the holding of the hands in the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah. I think those were two of the, pivotal moments of the entire series, not just this episode, but the entire series. So, as you mentioned early on in this particular episode, and just in general, time is very much a central theme. As you said, we're not just looking at the past, we're looking at what we're going to impact for the present, and then what's going to eventually happen in the future. And we can't afford to just only look at the past as the past, like you said. And so,
because if we keep it in the past, then people think you can't disconnect the past from the present. It's impossible, because then we'll only look at these issues of racism, for example, as only in the past.
Right.
Also, we are descendants, so we can't be disconnected from the past. If we are descendants of these great ancestors, so the past and the present are together, and the future. Time is not just one way, or that was years ago. We had that issue before where people thought racism was over, slavery ended.
We live in a post-racial society.
Post-racial society, which is, what is that again? No one knows, because we don't have lived in it. So even with that being the case, we can't disconnect ourselves from this past. We can't afford to do so. We have to acknowledge it all. And how it affects us today. If we are descendants, we have to recognize our ancestors. So,
So in knowing that, so what is this anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre? Because this is a significant anniversary, I believe. 1921. Oh Lord, my math is just bad. But we know it's a significant year this year that we, definitely want to acknowledge and recognize, and that, the hope for me is that we will continue to have these conversations, that this will not just be a moment because Lovecraft Country talked about it or because someone else, another TV show brought it up, is that this will be a continuous conversation, that we will uncover more memories, that
Right.
we will be able to tell more stories, because this just can't be a one-time moment.
Right.
This needs to be incorporated in the curriculum, and not just in Tulsa, but everywhere.
I'll say that. Like there were so many massacres and race riots that has happened, even in Atlanta. Like
Right.
there's so many race riots going on that we have to talk about that.
Yep.
We have to acknowledge our past. To even have an effect of present, we have to acknowledge it. We have to
Exactly.
recognize what happened. So yeah, I think that's very important.
Which I think segues perfectly into the final episode, and this idea of it being called full circle. Well, everything, they know what they're doing with these titles. Everything comes full circle in episode 10. This is where questions get answered. Questions are getting answers. We revisit some things that, as I've told you in other episodes, we knew what was going to happen.
Yes.
We knew back in episode 6 what was going to happen in episode 10, but it's like we blocked that.
Mm-hmm.
We figure, oh no, it's going to change, or no, that's not going to happen. We pushed it to the back.
Right.
But
right.
we knew all along what was going to happen with Tick. We knew all along what was going to happen just in general. But because there were moments and hints being dropped, there were breadcrumbs that were left for us that we just I don't know if it was just mentally we didn't want to accept it, but they were there. So.
I mean, I definitely see that, because even was the 6th episode the one where they were in Korea?
Correct. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Knew then that was the answer.
Yeah, I mean that was
She knew. She we all knew. They said, "Oh no, was it then?" Yeah, because she called at the end of the episode. She called. So yeah, it was.
And she had told him when the Kumio had grabbed him before and it didn't kill him, and she was like, "Yeah, you ain't living. You ain't. It's just this it for you, bro." So sorry. So
take me serious with the. I'm gonna look up everything, figure out what she just said.
Right.
You gonna die.
Yeah. So yeah, full circle, episode 10. So they return back from Tulsa. They on a mission now. They got the book of names. Yeah. It's like, all right, let's get this, let's get Dee back here, and so, that moment happens. They're able to bring her back. She's still kind of mortified and petrified of what has happened to her. So it's not like an easy, like, I'm here. I made it back. No. There's still some,
And even that, her arm is like
dead. It's dead.
She has a dead arm. So even that speaks of like the trauma of racism.
Mm-hmm.
Like she still bears the mark, even if she's back in life is, is normal. Well, normal in Lovecraft Country is not really normal. But even in the effect of that, it's like, I still bear the scars of this.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I still have to build from this. I just want to say that.
Yes. Yeah, so we also see, the consequences of the audacity of white privilege. We see, I think about when Shuri wakes up, old boy from Black Panther was like, colonizer. Yeah, that's Christina.
That's exactly
because the way she rolled up in there into, the car place, like she just owned it, like it was hers.
Walk in, didn't knock, didn't ring a doorbell, didn't say, is anyone in? Nothing. Just walked in there like, where the book of names? Ma'am, I'm sorry, what's your last name? Like, do you need a travel book? Like, what are you doing?
See, that's where they needed to put the mark on that place too. Because, she knew she couldn't come to the house.
But
because she...
That would have been nice if they had the lady come back to mark every place where they stayed. That would have been
that needed to be done. Yeah,
that's fine. No worries. I mean, she still came in there and tried to say, I'm entitled to this. Oh, I'm going to get my way. It's going to happen. And honestly, throughout the episode, she does get her way.
Yeah, to a point. Mm-hmm.
To a point. But it was this whole idea of what white privilege does.
Right.
Giving you access, or you being entitled to this space, or getting this space regardless. And we see that with Christina. And even though they try to fight back, it's still like, oh, but still, this is my space. Mm-hmm. Every space is my space, except that house lady has.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah. So even in what she thought was hers and what she thought she could control, in the end, unfortunately, she suffers the consequences of no longer existing, and she can't use that power no more,
Nope.
ever. So,
Yes.
yeah. So
Thought she-
yes. So once again, we're heavy in the metaphors. Fire comes back again now, but fire has rage now.
Right. So, we talked about the whole thing of the fire and Hannah running through the house, and we find out, okay, she set the fire. And then she explains to Tick, because apparently, he's now back in his house with her. And she said, at first I was scared of this fire, but then I learned to control it. My rage. I was scared and I kept living it, but it was my rage, so I just learned to control it. And then she put the fire out. She was like, this is my fire.
And you're like, oh,
Hey, that's a word.
it is.
He was like, I got this.
And it was she with authority. Once again, Black women in authority, saying it, speaking it, and daring you to question them on it. It was, yeah. So
it was. And I love how she kind of grabbed it and she was like, but this is it.
Yeah.
And I learned the fire. I didn't kill. I learned the fire.
Yep.
And this is your fire. Your family.
Exactly. And we also see, and I think this was 10, if not, it was 9, where Nana Hattie talks to Letty about her fears and her doubts and how you can't let that cripple you. And it's
that was this one.
How she was like, you can't let your fears and your doubts cripple your basically your future generations.
Right.
And that if that's not a word, if that's not a word, man.
You gotta do what you have to do because then your future generation will be looking back like, what happened? It's not about you. Don't be consumed by doubts. Don't be consumed by your fears.
Don't let it take you out the game.
Don't let it take you out the game. So it was a word. I just want to say Nana Hattie was very forceful in this episode too, because at one moment when Tick was like, I'm sad, Mom, I love you a lot. She was like, come on, we gotta get this done.
But you need somebody like that. You need somebody to keep you going, when you ready to just give up, like, oh, no, we ain't got time to give up. We ain't got time.
And that's fine, but 5 more minutes would have helped. Out there, I just think that was because she really was like, come on, gotta get this done. She had the book in her hand around the bed. Okay. Hurry up, Tick, give her a hug, let's go, So yeah.
Yeah, so we also see, not only do we see the metaphor of fire, but we saw the metaphor of spirituality, the spirit, the metaphor of renewal, this idea. We see there's a scene where we see Letty and Tick, being baptized. So, this kind of discovering of faith, because even Tick is still trying to figure out, like, do I believe? Like, I don't know if I believe in that, even though Letty is like, we got this new person that's coming here.
Right.
We need to, be on some one accord here, and how God will protect us.
Right. Because he was like, she lost her immunity.
Right.
At that moment when, Christina felt like she can walk into somebody's place. Away the immunity of Letty and the child.
Yeah.
So he said, well, I don't know what's going to happen. She said, God will protect us.
And he pauses. I mean, he's not all the way fully, convinced of that, but I think he is enough convinced that because Letty believes it, like there's some kind of belief for him, in that. So.
And that to me was, very powerful, because even if he didn't believe, it brought him comfort to some degree.
Exactly. There we go.
The spirituality, you may not believe in miracles and things like that, but well, some people don't. But again, it goes back to this comfort that faith brought her. Like it made her feel good. Like, I don't need Christina. I don't need the dark magic that she uses. That's not our magic, this dark magic. We don't need that for protection.
Right.
We have God on our side. So let's use that. So that to me was, very powerful.
Yeah, it brought him some sense of peace.
Yes, it definitely did. And another thing that came up again is we see these Black women. I mean,
they never left. Let's just put that out there. They never left.
They all play a role. Even as Dee, they leave Dee in the back seat in the corner somewhere in the woods. But even other than that, you have Letty, Ruby, and Hippolyta all trying to figure out, okay, what should we do? They all play very powerful roles. And so I really appreciate that. So not only do you have these 3 Black women, you see 3 Black women generations. because you see at this moment, not later on, but earlier in the episode, you see Nana Hattie, Hannah,
Dora.
Dora, that's it. Dora, and you see them all there because they're trying to get the magic back.
Right.
And that was
what was stolen.
he said, so the Titus was like, what are you doing with my magic? Because they're now in the spiritual circle. And he is there with Hannah. And Hannah was like, he said, why you steal my magic? And Hannah said, what's stolen isn't yours.
Right. Like, no, sir, this was never yours.
This was not yours. And so at different points in the episode, you see how Letty and Atticus brought forth these women to help with the spiritual incantations and things of that nature to go forth, for their own success for their family or whatever was next. It got a bit confusing for me, but it's fine.
They served as the connective tissue.
That's what it is.
They are the bringers, the nurturers, the carriers of life.
Yes.
All of that. And we see that through each kind of like moment when they're in these spiritual circles, in these spiritual realms, and, using magic or whatever, however we want to call it, spirituality, however it's being named, they're reclaiming it to make sure that their legacy lives forward, that their legacy continues on.
And so I really appreciate that because it goes back to, everyone's important in the family, but you see how Black women have been the cornerstone, how their strength has been a cornerstone to these families, to this family, and how they needed them to come back to reclaim this magic,
right? To
reclaim their own protection, because they knew they were going to be hit with something by Christina. So like, no, come on.
And I loved how they welcomed it with open arms. There was no resistance fighting against it. Like, no, we don't need y'all. We got this. No, thank you. Appreciate it. It was like, no, what I need to do, tell me what I need to do and I'll get it for you.
That's exactly what it was. And even when Tick at one point, he saw his mother, which is definitely understandable. He was trying to, how they were saying the incantations, the spells to send him back, and how he could not really go through with it. And he stopped, and Letty showed up and was like, well, she didn't show up, she was there, but she finished it for him.
Right.
It's like, I'll pick up the mantle. I got you. You have to do this. I got your back. Yep. So yeah, it was very, very powerful. But again, we have to go back to D, but we'll talk about D in a minute because Clea is nowhere near anyone.
No, yeah. So, another thing that I'm always asking myself, what's your purpose in life? So we see that, come to fruition here in this episode, if you're, what is it that you're here for? What are you going to be doing? What are you giving up? What are you bringing in? What are you taking away? How we don't operate as an individual, never have, never will. This is always a community effort, even though there's the solo body, there's the community wide that we're always, functioning in, and how your purpose affects other people in their life. So
it's like what his mother told him. He was like, she said to him, if we're not going to walking towards the altar to sacrifice ourselves,
exactly,
what's the purpose? If we're not here for others, what are we doing here?
Right.
And because Tick knew that he would have to sacrifice his life, that he would die or he would be killed. Because then they have to throw out the question: is it a sacrifice, or was he getting
a selfless act? Yeah, what is it?
Act? What was the situation? So, you have this moment where he doesn't really want to, and she's like, "What's your purpose here if it's not to save others?
Right?
Why are you here? I know it's hard, but we are to sacrifice ourselves for our future generations, just as they did." So it was a very powerful moment because you make a great point. What is our purpose? Why are we here? It's more than just for ourselves.
Yep. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to know it's going to be the same today. Like tomorrow, I may realize that this is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
A week from now, I may realize this is what I'm supposed to do. So it's a continuous process. It's a continuous journey that we're on, and our purpose, changes, stays the same, goes for a period of time. It's just a matter of understanding what it is and the role that it plays. So
exactly.
Yes. What else we got? Oh, grieving and moving forward. So here we also see Gia comes back.
Yes.
And we see her, and she plays a role in the connective tissue,
Yes.
so to
Yes.
speak, in a way. And how she meets with Tick, and they, have a conversation and they talk, and she talks about the loss of her mother and how she was able to feel like her daughter. She was able to feel certain things that she had not felt before.
Right.
But
Right.
then that they kind of, went away, and, Tick so easily says, it's called grieving. That's what you have to do. And it's so easy to kind of put out there, but it's so hard for us to do.
Yes, it is.
We don't want to, it's like we don't want to grieve, because we
Mhm.
figure we got to do all these things, particularly, women, and like in our case, Black women, we don't
Mhm.
have time. So we're always, I ain't got time to grieve. I got to do this, and it's like, but I can't move forward if I don't grieve.
Right. You almost become a robot when you're dealing with death, when you're mourning. And
Hmm.
that is an issue when you're dealing with Black women, because we're like, okay, I need to take a moment to just focus on myself, but you're
Right.
not allowed to.
Hmm.
Because then you're like, okay, I have to go to work, I have to take care of the family, I have to, even when you're dealing with death yourself, you have to make sure everyone else is dealing with it, the best way. So you give yourself in their grieving.
Yep. Yep.
And you don't take time to really deal with it yourself.
Hmm.
And that's one reason why I like Montrose, because Montrose, that whole thing of him losing his son, it was real.
Yeah.
It was real to him. And we saw what his grieving looked like.
And I had to give it to him. Like, he grieved out loud,
Yes, he
like
did.
all the time. I
Mhm.
mean, if anything, people may have looked at him differently. People may have treated him differently, but he grieved out loud.
He did.
People maybe didn't like it, but that was how he had to grieve. And because he was actively grieving
Mhm.
all the time,
I
because there
think
was some loss.
the whole series he was grieving. He was grieving the loss of himself.
Hmm.
He was grieving the loss of his brother.
Yep.
He was grieving the loss of his son.
Yeah.
Like, he was, he never really had a true connection. He was grieving so much. And in this episode, we see how he was grieving Tick.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he went through all stages of grief.
Right.
He
Hmm.
started with the night, he was like, Tick, come on, we gotta go.
We're gonna come back to that. We're gonna come back to that.
Oh my god, I gotta talk about that. Okay, it's fine. We'll get into it. But yeah,
uh, but so speaking of Tick too, like Tick had to grapple with his own issues with Montrose, with George, with
yeah,
whomever who's his dad. But there's also an emptiness that we don't talk about, or it's not really talked about until now. Is like his mother.
yeah,
He really never like deals with that. He never really grapples with that. And in this episode, we get a chance for him to finally say goodbye. He gets to finally
right.
maybe have some kind of closure,
Mhm.
because he gets to have that conversation with her that he never got to.
Right, right. He got to understand, got to really know and see his mother. And
Yep.
that's almost what he was searching for this whole time, because he's been
Yeah.
raised mainly by his father. So he's like, who's
Mhm.
my mother? Who is she? And so this was closure for him, especially as we, near the end of this particular season, hopefully season.
Right.
Um, it was really good to see him connect to his mother.
Exactly.
It was really
So, in the end, one thing that comes out that stands out for me is this idea of family.
good.
I realized that, not that this was the first time, but you understand the complexities and layers of family, that we come in different ways, that we're not necessarily the two parent with the kid, and the dog. Like, there are many ways that family can be portrayed. And Lovecraft Country does an excellent job of telling us, the ways in which we see family, the family dynamics. Gia gets welcomed into the family by Tick. Montrose gets another chance to be a father, or address fatherhood. He gets to fix maybe the mistakes that he did before with
Right.
his grandson, his soon-to-be grandson.
And that's very powerful too, because even in that conversation, this whole idea of being a father, and how, yes, Atticus may have been the child of George, but that was Montrose's son.
Mm-hmm.
So you even see how that works.
Yep.
And so family is not always cookie cutter, this type of nuclear family, two parents, kids, and everybody knows each other, loves each other. It's
White
not
picket
that.
fence. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with the picket fence, and it was beautiful. Families are, like you said, complex. It's
Mm-hmm.
not as clear, but family is still family nonetheless.
And I like that it's not so clear, cut and dry.
Yes.
You know, it goes back to that same thing of like going back in the past. Do I really want a very like cookie cutter, very clear? Like, no, I don't.
Because if we're all a community, then we're all family.
Exactly. Exactly.
So we don't have to be one way. We don't have to be individualistic. Our family does not have to be isolated outside of our community. So yes, this person may be your child, but I took care of them because they came home after school every day to me. So I'm like their auntie.
Yeah.
So even how we use auntie today.
Right.
And we always find new ways of really expanding what it means to be family.
Yep.
When you have fictive kin and how you have people who may not be biological, but they're still your family.
Exactly.
So,
exactly. Yep. So, oh yes. And so, you know, I knew you was dying on this one, you know. So even in this family, we still got to talk about, they still not figuring out what they're going to do with D. It's like,
it's so easy. Don't leave her. That's it. That's all we ask. I'm not asking for too much. I'm not even asking for her to have some water. All I'm saying is don't leave her.
Now, she does have a moment with her mother where it becomes very brutally honest about how you left me in those exact words. She does have to have that very deep conversation, or that very complicated, not so easy conversation with her mother. Hippolyta does have to explain why she was not there. You know, so they have to have that kind of understanding, that moment of, this is what I had to do for you, for me, you know. So.
And that was powerful because you see Dee advocated for herself in that moment.
She did.
I was like, I went to multiple worlds. I saw all this stuff. I don't care where you went.
Because you left me.
Like, and he's like, you're right. And go, I'll be back. I mean, because really, yes, I'm so happy you found yourself. But look at me. You left me.
Mm-hmm.
Turned right on over, and Hippolyta was like, you're right, I did. Let me go ahead and get some water outside. But again, they left her one more time when they're at this, you know,
in Artem. So when they make the trip to Artem, yeah.
They leave her in the car. The car is not even on the road. They leave her in the woods reading a book with a flashlight.
It's Lovecraft Country at that too, if you notice that.
Lovecraft Country.
So yeah, she's in the back seat of this car reading at night. It's not daytime, it's nighttime. You know, as she's just reading with her flashlight. Everybody else doing what they doing, getting ready for the equinox, and you know, getting ready for what's happening, fighting and all that. You know, Dee just is like,
hey, look at this book.
Yeah. Once again,
they could have had one chaperone.
Yeah, somebody. So once again, the invisibility, you know, of Dee is just like, you'll be all right here. It's almost like they're making her grow up so fast.
Right.
You know, she doesn't get to be a kid. Like, she has to grow up quite quickly.
From what they wanted in the episode where her friend was killed.
Right.
They were like, we need to protect her. She shouldn't.
What happened to that protection?
What happened? It's not like you guys are going to the store. She is in the woods at night in Autumn, Lovecraft Country, and you all are dealing with death at its best, and she's just sitting there. So yeah, that was very interesting, and yeah.
But I think what helps to compensate for that, it doesn't diminish it what happened, but it helped, you know, to compensate for that is that Dee has the last line. She has the last word. She has the last moment, you know, and so I think there's something in the future. So she is the future.
Yeah.
She is carrying the fire. She is the legacy. And she kind of has to say that one closing line to Christina, like, you just don't learn.
Yep.
You just don't learn.
It was a closing line because we lost Christina that moment.
Yeah, and in that moment, it was done.
It was,
you know.
That was the powerful scene where it ended with this girl, the one who has been, you know, pushed aside and rendered invisible, and she comes back with the last line, and Christina asking for help, like, help me. Are you serious?
Right, and in Dee's silence, she takes Christina's silence.
She sure did. She sure did. And the monster was like, "You got this."
Yeah.
He went over there and she was like, I got it, you good, thank you though.
Appreciate you.
He was there just start yelling at the moon. She was like, you do that. But it shows again her strength. Like she was like, I got this. She was great. She was excellent.
Yep.
Another aspect of this episode, one of the last ones, was when he was killed and they took his body back. And I think it's important that we speak on that, especially in light of the conversation right now on move victims and being used for science for at Penn. And so I think in this episode, you see how Black bodies are sacred, just like any place, but we privilege and we render Black bodies as sacred because they are our ancestors. They are our community. And even the process of, okay, we're going to bring him back. We're going to not just drag him, we're going to lift him. Carry him in honor of him and his work and his past.
Right.
And so again, you see the importance of the dead, because death isn't the end. And that's what we found out earlier by Hippolyta. Hippolyta said that in so many words. Death is not the end.
Right.
Even in the conversations, yes, they may be physically deceased, but their memories still live on, and death is not the end. And this memory is through even the respecting their bodies.
Exactly.
So all that falls right in line. We can't just look at racism only in conversations of the living. We have to look at it in conversations of the deceased.
Yep.
And in their memories and in history and their stories and et cetera, et cetera. So I really appreciated that, the carrying of his body back, like in honor of you and your work on this earth.
Right.
And again, it goes back to us cherishing and really recognizing and acknowledging our deceased.
Absolutely. I mean, because he was definitely abused in that moment, abused, brutalized, everything. I mean, it was in a way a very kind of like low key, like this is Christ on the cross type of scene.
Yeah.
You know, and where you see this white woman basically, finding joy in being showered in his blood.
Right, exactly. And then even when you see Letty, you remember when she was yelling out words from Adam, the language of Adam, she was yelling, like crying out, wailing, how she just passed by her, like, give it up, and just walked by her, like the pain of Blackness didn't matter to her.
Exactly.
Like, look at my power. I don't care about your pain.
Right.
It was like, oh, bet, no worries. Let me keep talking. And then let Jill come over here and deal with the darkness real quick. We'll handle it.
And it was like, boom, 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 boom. Everything fell into place when it was supposed to. And, like you see Tick being able to kind of give that last look to Letty, and then him able to kind of say goodbye, in a sense. Like you said, the carrying of his body, the wrapping it up, and each person kind of like had a part of the ledge or whatever it is that he was on. And it was like this, moving him to somewhere where he needed to be, like a proper burial. Like we're not gonna just leave you just burial. We were talking about the conversation with like Sarah Bartman and how, so often Black bodies were not afforded the opportunity to rest in peace, and so here we get the chance to see, in that moment, like we don't have to wait 100+ years for his body to be reclaimed and buried and so forth.
Like, the move bombing was just in the 80s.
Yeah.
And funeral home right now, just like I think like last week or earlier this week, now have the remains of the children that was being used for science or used for I guess like not exhibition, but for a class.
Right.
Class. So it was, we talking about the 80s, and there are still others who we have not acknowledged yet or do not know as of yet that are still being kept for whatever reason.
Right.
And here, you see again this return of the body by the family, and to be even the pallbearer in a funeral is a respect position. And so it's like you're carrying, it's like in honor of, and so it was a very moving situation for to us. Like it was,
absolutely. I mean, it was like I say, it was a very touching way to be the almost ending of the series of this episode, and it was powerful. And as much as like we knew what was going to happen to Tick, but I think just seeing it actually play out reads differently. Even regardless of the fact that we knew. So when it's all said and done, like I said, I really enjoy being able to kind of reliving, going back through this series and really having these good in-depth conversations
Yeah.
that started out as just like a
Mhm.
FaceTime chat to
Right.
becoming like, no, we need to tell the world about this. We need
Yeah.
to have
Yeah.
this be made public. And there were some other, remarks that we definitely wanted to make sure to include because there's just so much that happens. But
Mhm.
there's some other things that definitely are worth mentioning. Unfortunately, Ruby gets caught as a casualty,
Mhm.
and she is becomes a sacrificial lamb.
Right.
Not by choice. Um, which you feel for that, and I feel like there was this constant like Ruby was trying to find herself
Yes.
in the struggle, with that.
Even
We
she still sacrificed herself for her sister.
right,
Even the struggle.
even
Mhm.
that. We see, a black family moving in across the street from Letty, so we're seeing change is happening in the neighborhoods.
Like,
There's
went
always
through all that. She went through all that, so now we have more black families in the neighborhood.
exactly. So it's like, yes, come on, y'all, come
It's
on.
like, hi, we just popped up, hi. It was like, what are you doing?
Like
Like,
that feel good moment of like, I made change and look what's happening, the fruits of the labor. So um,
that was good. That was good.
we definitely are always seeing the calling of the ancestors for guidance. And, this if you didn't know then, you know now. Like the ancestors are always here to guide us.
Yeah,
They never take a break.
right.
Even when we feel like we need a break, they never take a break.
They're
So
they're helping us with our fire. They're like, keep the
mhm,
fire. We're trying to make sure that you maintain this fire. And so again, it goes back to honoring our ancestors. And so it is important that they're doing their work, that we do our work in being, respecting them and
exactly.
honoring them and what they're doing for us.
Yep. We see an ode to Black motherhood, past, present, and future. We see an ode to Black daughters and girls. Like I say, the fact that D closes out the series, the episode, they are ending with the future. They
Right.
are ending with what is to happen next. You
Mhm.
know.
And I think that's important because we tend to think of Black people as only adults. We have,
Mm-hmm.
we are girls and we are boys as well, and we are,
Yep.
gender neutral, gender non-conforming. It's so many different ways in which we are youth.
Exactly.
We need to be mindful of that as well. So yeah, I really appreciate this episode for that.
Yep. So what are your thoughts for the season overall? What are your takeaways? What you learn?
For me, it's something that we just said, respecting our ancestors,
Mm-hmm.
and also the role of faith. Because as a Christian, I really rely on my faith as my guidance, like
Right.
as my peace. And the same with ancestors. It's like
Mm-hmm.
I give respect to my ancestors because of them. I am, not to
Yeah.
use the same quote as in posters, but it's true.
Mm-hmm.
So I must always honor and respect them. Um, and also even elders, the role of elders and
Yeah.
understanding how they play a role in our lives, mentors and being a mentee and always learning and never stop learning. Because there's all, even though this episode was not about learning in the traditional sense of blah blah blah, but it's still important to have people around you to help guide you, to have this strong community to help
Mm-hmm.
you. So yeah, that's what I
Yep.
take home.
For me, in this episode and in this series overall, is that we know how to tell a story, and we are the true storytellers. I learned even so much. Like there were things I knew, but I learned more. It made me think about things more. It made me want to be a better, professor. It made me want to be a
Yes.
better Black woman. It made me want to tap into more into, what the ancestors have to offer. Like, me and the ancestors, we good, but I'm like, we need to be even more.
I have a meeting with you real quick on
Yeah,
Thursday.
right.
Like it wouldn't hurt.
Exactly. So, the fact that this series offered, as we have said before, a history lesson. Every episode gave us something to learn about, to incorporate into the books, to tell our family and friends, to share in our classrooms,
Right.
in the case of both you and I. Um, it was just a great season. It was a great show. I'm so glad that it existed, and crossing fingers, I hope it continues. The word is still out, jury is still out on that. But I really do hope that it does continue because there's so much more left to tell. There's so many more things that they can bring to the table. And we need more shows like this.
Yes, we do. We
So,
absolutely do. And I want to, end with this as well. I felt seen in
yeah,
felt
yeah.
seen. It's like You get it.
In many different ways. In many different ways. Yeah.
Many different ways. It was like, exactly, from what does it mean to be a Black woman, to Black burden, to trauma, to how you deal with trauma. It was just like,
yeah,
you see me. This is what it is. So I think that was important too, because when we think about representation, and of course we see representation more on TV, but in this way, where we really get to see ourselves, where Blackness is not just a dot, like not that, but a dot on the oh my god, but it's not just a dot on the screen. Like, oh, we have Black people here and we talk about Black stories, but it's actually being discussed. Black trauma is being really talked about. So I feel seen.
Yeah, and seen in front of the screen and behind the screen, because often we do see ourselves on the screen, but we don't behind the screen. We tend to not, talk about that. So. Yeah, so the creators, Misha Green, if you're listening, like we crossing fingers that y'all get picked back up again. We really want to see this again. Also the book, if you all haven't read the book, I definitely would say definitely check that out. It's very good. There's even more in the book too. So, if you want, I think I've been telling myself, I feel like I want to read it again just to kind of go back and get some nuggets that, where
that one chapter really is like
the Narrow House.
Like, that needs to be a movie itself. Like Lovecraft movie 1. I don't know. I'm not good with titles, but I think that would be really excellent.
Absolutely. So there's much material. There's definitely not a shortage of it. Y'all know what y'all doing, so we just gonna trust that y'all got this covered. So
yeah, let us know what we need to do. We need to sign a petition. We good.
Right.
Well, you all, I want to say thank you so much for joining us with our conversation on Lovecraft and so many more. And one thing I will say again, we really appreciate you having us on this journey with Lovecraft. And if you have any recommendations for anything else, please just let us know. Like if you're like, oh, look at these different shows. We really appreciate you joining us with conversations with Beloved and Kindred. And we have another one coming up this month. And we will be focusing on the Eddie Murphy film, Vampire in Brooklyn, but it will be in conversation with his other films, such as The Golden Child. What is it?
Imagine that.
That's it.
So we've touched upon Harlem Nights, so we're gonna bring that back into the discussion too. So
so we're gonna really be talking about Eddie Murphy movies. I would say that. And Vampire Brooklyn was spearheaded, but we will be talking about Eddie Murphy and his work from an Afrofuturistic feminist perspective. So I look forward to having that conversation with you, and thank you for joining us this episode. And we look forward to seeing you next episode. It's going to be great. Thank you.
Yay! So yes, and remember, y'all, if this is even more pertinent now, what I tell y'all, what I close y'all with, to the next time, remember the past is a living thing. The present prepares for us, and the future is ours. We'll see you on the next round. Have a great one.